आज आपके नाम डॉक्टर अख्तर संधू अपने मेहमान के साथ हर पीर की शब यूके टाइम 4 बजे, पाकिस्तान टाइम 9 बजे देखना मत भूलिएगा, सिर्फ और सिर्फ GsTv UK पर। इस प्रोग्राम के लिए हमारे साथ ताउन किया है लाहौरी डेरा रेस्टोरेंट, स्टॉकपोर्ट रोड, मैनचेस्टर।
Hello, dear friends. Welcome once again on Monday night. Aaj Aap K Naam, Dr. Akhtar Sandhu. Um, you know that every Monday we have special guest for you, and we talk about different aspects of different topics. And today we have arranged a special guest for you, and she is Madina Plieva. Madina Plieva is a Russian scholar, educationist, international relations expert. She is a researcher on diplomacy, public diplomacy, and we are very thankful to Madina Plieva for sparing some time for our programs. Hello, Madina.
Hello, Akhtar. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you very much for sparing some time, and we welcome you in our show. Marina Plieva, as we have already introduced her, expertise, she is an educationist, international relations expert, researcher on public diplomacy. She is so competent and talented scholar that we are very much impressed. And today we will talk about different topics relating to US-Russia relations, US-Ukraine, Iran relations, and her expertise in different aspects of the topic. So before we start question and answers, we have some pictorial display. We have some pictures of achievement of Madina Plieva. So let us watch the pictorial display. So please. Welcome back, friends. Madina Plieva is with us, and we have so many questions. And I'm very much excited because for the first time, a Russian scholar is talking to me and my viewers. So this is, we welcome you, Madina, in our show. So just we start with the questions about your childhood, your family background, about your qualification, your educational background. So viewers want to know about your family background and other qualifications and your educational career actually. So how you spend your school days, college days, university days, and what the hurdles you faced during your childhood, and what made you a successful researcher. So all the things we want to know. And I want to tell you that I would try to speak less, and we will try to listen you more and more. Please.
Yeah, I was about to say that I don't want to, take all the space, and I want to let you talk enough. But apparently, I will have to share a lot tonight. So yes, I was born in Russia, specifically in the middle of the country, which is Moscow. However, as you can tell from my name, which is not exactly Slavic, yeah, it's a name which is most known as the name of the holy city of Medina. However, etymologically, this word has deeper roots because originally it's an Aramaic word. This is because my father is a Muslim, although, in Russia and everywhere, I think Islam is not something you can define very strictly. And my mom, she is Russian. So neither of them came from Moscow. So I'm the first generation Muscovite. I studied, again, thanks largely to the efforts of my parents who wanted me and my two younger brothers to pursue serious education. I studied in a very good school, like 8 years of my school education. And in the late years, I grew interested in the subject of sociology because, again, we had many invited professors who taught not only at schools, not only at my school, but also in some of the most prestigious universities, not only inside of Russia. And then I decided that, yes, this is what I want to study. However, I also, I'm that kind of person who pays attention to the realities of the surrounding, environment. And partly because I felt a bit out of place, like I did not exactly feel like I represent any sort of mainstream culture, because I never felt like I'm really, Russian in terms of like being Slavic. No. And this is why I think I was very open minded from the very start, and I was interested in different cultures. I knew early on that this aspect of life does affect relationships between people. And because Russia is a multi ethnic, multi national country, this is something that is very important. Just like as I know in the case of the region you can say you represent. And so later on, in fact, for a short period of time, I was a student of the Russian People's Friendship University. So I met a number of individuals who came to Russia because of the quality of education, or simply because they wanted to experience life in another country. In Russia, we have quite many foreign students, although I know there is this goal of inviting more and more of these. However, later I decided that yes, I want to go abroad. I would like to embark on an international educational program. And so I have chosen as my destination the beautiful city of Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary. uh, you know, Hungarians, they don't like when we call them Eastern Europeans because they prefer to be labeled as Central Europeans. Hungary was previously part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and generally speaking, they have this a little bit of pessimism in their mentality because of the many historical troubles this country had to go through. And yeah, to I think, yeah, it's good to know that some of them are associated with the Russian Empire too, that got involved in the affairs in the region a number of times. And so my bachelor's degree, it was focused on the international affairs. We had a lot of subjects dedicated to the primarily European, but also international law, history of Europe in the first place. And in my final year, I decided to write my thesis work on the relationships between Iran and the United States. And I got really interested in this topic. I did a lot of research, like I was really passionate about it, because many bachelor students do not take this first work seriously enough. But for me, you can say I was lucky, but I would rather say that this is my personality. I tend to get passionate about certain things. And this issue continues to interest me right now, even though the continuation of my educational story was a bit, tricky, because I did my internship at the Russian International Affairs Council, and I also got familiar with a non-governmental organization that sought to promote Russian public diplomacy efforts. So I took a course of public diplomat with them, and later, briefly, I worked, not briefly, like several months, I think. I authored several articles for them. I edited their English language website and contributed in how I could. And then I got accepted for a program, dual master's degree in global security, Russian American degree. So you can say it's like a dream program for someone who wants to really shine as an international scholar. However, there were issues, and I don't want to put, a shadow on my country. I think we should all try to be honest. MGIMO is an institution that has a lot to offer, and many international people, many people who currently are involved in politics in a number of states across the globe. They study there. However, I didn't like the fact that the program was very much focused on the nuclear energy and nuclear non-proliferation, which is, of course, a very good cause. But because I came from this background of research in Russian, or American Iranian relationships, knew that Russia has several issues that you can say have some similarities. I wanted to focus my research on the, you can say, psychology of terrorism. Yeah, so what drives people to commit certain violent attacks. However, this topic wasn't likely to be confirmed, to be approved by the Russian side. And in the end, I decided that the prospect of, embarking on this program, paying quite substantial sum of money, and then up in a pretty uncertain situation where you're not sure if you can actually be admitted in the Foreign Service. For example, my ex-course mate who eventually graduated from this program, his dream was to become part of this ministry. And he prepared a lot. And in fact, he did his bachelor's degree at the same university. But still, it's a very non-transparent system, and you can hardly guess. You cannot really put your stake on this thing alone, even if this is something you have a strong desire for. So maybe for him it was worth it, but for me, I knew that I want to explore maybe people-to-people communications rather than state-to-state interactions. We have quite a hard legacy of the Cold War and of the years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think we do need this people-to-people diplomacy, maybe more than ever.
You have talked a lot about different aspects of your research and your society. This is wonderful information. So you have talked about Russia as a multi-ethnic and multicultural country. So what's your culture?
So, as I mentioned, my parents represent different ethnicities. Although, because Russia is a secular state, as most modern states, the vast majority of them, there is no emphasis on culture or on some kind of ethnic background in the social institutions of the state, of course. So what it means is that you go to school, you go to university. We are supposed to be like equal. We're supposed to celebrate our backgrounds. For me, because my dad, as I said, he comes from Caucasus, and he comes specifically from Ingushetia. So in fact, my last name is the same as the name of one little town or maybe even village in Ingushetia, which is Plieva. Yes, but I have never been there. I have only gone there once on a touristic trip, and not even to Ingushetia, but to Chechnya. These two independent today, they are independent republics. In fact, historically, they represent one ethnicity, which has this name Vainachs. There are some differences, and one of maybe one of the most important differences is that Chechen people, they adopted Islam much earlier than Ingush did. I cannot say that I'm an expert on this topic because my dad does not teach me anything that has to do with that. In fact, my parents they divorced, and yeah, I'm sorry to say that, but part of the reason was the disagreements on this ethnic, you can say, grounds, because these peoples who live in the mountains, they have this particular mentality, and they have this pride. But I think for my dad, because both of my parents they are doctors, he served, for instance, his military service was somewhere in Eastern Germany. And when he came back to Russia, he thought that he can get a good job just because of his education. My parents, in fact, they met in the Central Institute of Traumatology and Orthopathy in Moscow after long years of study, both of them. But I don't really know a lot about that, but from what I heard, there was some kind of discrimination on this ethnic ground, and more than that, because we know that in times of the Great War with Nazi Germany, certain peoples were thought to be potential traitors. So there was this idea in Stalin's mind that these people can choose to collaborate with the Germans and not fight against them. And
Mm.
in Gushs and Chechens, they were part of, they were ones of these peoples who had to be forcibly deported to the region of Kazakhstan. And so that was a very bloody affair. And of course, in the memory of those peoples, it lived, and it does live strong. And I think that my father, as a representative of Ingush people, he felt that there is
Actually,
a very serious
Madina,
injustice.
actually, I wanted to know about your cultural heritage, the death ceremonies, and when people, common people, are happy, how they celebrate their days, marriage parties, and other things. What kind of dressing, different from other regions, music, dance. So I want to know about that.
Okay, I see. So to sum up, the point of this story was that smaller peoples who feel somewhat underrepresented, who feel like their voices are not being heard, they have this painful memory. And the majority, the Russians, they don't have this problem. Yeah, most of the time, they don't. Even though, of course, it exists in Russia that sometimes you don't lease a flat to someone who is non-Slavic, which is, of course, a shame, but still. And speaking of cultures and speaking of traditions and rituals, you should really, really differentiate between the inhabitants of large cities, especially such cities as Moscow and St. Petersburg, which are very international. You can say that someone who lives in Moscow does not specifically self identify as a Russian. This person may self identify as a Moscovite, someone who comes from Moscow. And in my generation, you can say that we're very international. The way we celebrate marriages and the way we mourn dead people who have deceased, it's very individual. So, for example, I can tell you an example of my grandmother who lives somewhere next to the Ural Mountains, and she has lived there most of her life. So she has never lived in a big city, really. And what we do eventually, sometimes when we visit her, is we go to this cemetery and we clean it up. Like we take away all the grass, and on this cleaned space where the tombs are, we put some sweets, some biscuits, and it's like, it's a sort of gift, but it's maybe like a symbolic gesture, because who is going to eat these sweets? People who visit this cemetery, they're not going to open the fence and enter and take these sweets. No, of course, this is sacred. You cannot do it. So most likely this will be the birds who are going to pick it up and eat. So it's like a symbolic gesture. But Russia is an Orthodox Christian country. I mean, of course, all religions are supposed to be equal, yeah, and law is supposed to govern the affairs, the regulate the relationships between the people. Uh, but in the case of my grandmother, she had to leave this period when the communists took over and they forbid people from worshiping God. It was not allowed to do it in public. So she, even though she is a very religious person, a believer, she could not go and attend church. And so she did it secretly. And the most interesting part of this story is that her husband was a member of Communist Party. And, they thought whether they should Christianize, like baptize my mom or not. And my grandmother, she wanted to do it secretly, but my grandfather disagreed, because, I mean, he wouldn't accept it. And in the end, my mom, I think she finally got baptized later, many years later, already somewhere in Moscow. And then when she got married with my dad, she converted to Islam. It's not like she knows the prayers by heart or she prays. Not really, she works a lot. But the way it manifested in is that we have quite many books on Islam at home, and like this carpet that's used for praying and some other attributes. So you can say that it's like an interesting mixture of different rituals, which are not practiced primarily due to the fact that we live in a very high-speed society in Moscow here.
Okay, so can you sing a song relating to your folk or culture?
Um, I think many of the listeners can now recall one most popular Russian song, which is Katyusha, which is a song about the end of the war. And I have sang this song a couple of times. Once when I traveled to India to take part in a geographic festival in Lucknow. And the second time was when I represented Russia at a folklore festival in Morocco. I can sing some lines from this song, but I encourage the listeners to maybe Google and find something else, because this song alone cannot represent the vast, diversity of folklore and non-folklore art that's available. Расцветали яблони и груши, поплыли туманы над рекой. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий берег, на крутой. That's it.
Very good, excellent. So you have talked about secularism or secular state and religion as well. You have talked both. So how you reconcile your state? There is a communism, then there is a Christianity, Orthodox Church, and so what's the status of communism and religion in Russia right now in this society?
Um, I think that, no, in fact, I can say that religion maybe has witnessed some kind of a renaissance in the recent years. And from what I can observe, this is particularly seen among people who profess Islam. Because the Tatar communities, some of the Caucasian communities too, and to a large extent, diaspora from the Central Asian states who come to Russia to work, they have this stronger sense of solidarity, in group solidarity. And religion is one of those things that, keeps people together. Orthodoxy. I think that the attitude towards this religion is quite mixed. Because on the one hand, we tend to blame many bad events in Russia, especially when it comes to economic policies, on the surge, on resurgence of religion. Because Russia is officially, like historically, an Orthodox Christian state. This is oftentimes exploited in the public narrative to unite people against something. So people have this need for identity, like, who am I? What community do I belong to? And people who live regular lives in the cities, who feel no need for any sort of religious affiliation, who just, earn their living, who maybe do some charity, but who do not, who do not associate with them with any church or with any religion, they sometimes feel like they're being discriminated against by the public narrative. Because in the public narrative, we are all Orthodox Christians, or like the majority of us, which is far from being the truth. And this is like a challenge to make the public narrative reflect the actual situation in society. I believe that quite many people are non-believers, and quite a substantial part of the Russian population, which, as you know, is mostly concentrated in the western part of Russia. The eastern part, like what's to the east of the Ural Mountains, is very sparsely populated. A substantial part of them are Muslims, but these are very secularized Muslims, who do not necessarily pray 5 times a day. They are full members of society.
So you have very sound intellectual heritage, just like Catherine the Great, Peter the Great. So is there any impact the society feels right now after a communist revolution? So do you think that there is impact of these Catherine the Great and Peter the Great on the society?
Well, I try to be as accurate in my responses as I can be, because someone who shares his thoughts online has to, try to be responsible, and this is what I'm trying to be. You have probably heard of this idea of Eurasia, and of course, the imperial history is cherished, and maybe there is some sort of nostalgia for those times when Russia could wield its power, its influence over such a vast territory. And I would say that the attitude towards the Bolshevik Revolution, of course, this is a very painful moment, as any revolution is. And of course, there are always losers and winners. And there are people who stand for continuity. And there are people who feel like there is some kind of an injustice that has to be overcome. And quite clearly, this is not something you cannot deny. Just like in the case of the French Revolution, the monarch, the Romanovs, and Nikolai II specifically, but also some Tsars who ruled before him have committed a number of mistakes. You can put it this way. So they have done things without assessing how, in what way that will impact the moods of the people. So they could not keep their power. But this bloodshed and especially the years of repression, the most problematic thing right now is that we feel a little bit afraid of talking about these things publicly. So it's like some social polls that show that the figure of Stalin comes back, and that people have this need for a strong hand, like for someone who will show them the way, who will take everything under control. But I believe that this sense of uncertainty, it has to be present. Like, the government cannot completely eliminate those things. And undoubtedly, Stalin has done a number of awful deeds. But I don't see a problem with speaking about it publicly. Like, I think this will contribute to the well-being and health to the Russian society. Because when some topics are taboo, people feel disunited. Like, you have someone who says, no, this person was great, this was a great ruler. And you have someone who says, no, this was an amazing person who helped us win the war. Okay, these are feelings, but let us be open about the historical facts.
So we hear from different sources that there is no freedom of expression in Russia. So, what is the situation of tolerance for dissidents in your society, especially media, press, professors, and church? Are they independent to dissent or to disagree with the government? And is there any persecution by the government of the media and the other people who express some disagreement with the government?
Yes, and this is what I want to draw attention to when I say that preventing people from publicly expressing their views and from uncovering, revealing some of the historical events of the recent or not so recent past, that leads to this uncertainty about what is to be allowed and what is to be prohibited in the current moment. Yes, we do have persecution. We do have a number of political prisoners right now, and this is alarming. Of course, this is very bad because, um, you know, constructing the state's identity, you cannot repress civil engagement and civil initiatives. Because if you are to think smart, you have to understand that these people who do crafts, who learn languages, who do research, who connect with, who have some kind of values, who stand firm for certain principles, they are not going to do your state any bad. On the opposite, if you are being sincere, if you allow for discussion, of course, these public exchanges of views, they have to be moderated. There has to be someone who, guarantees the safety of disputes, because people are prone to sometimes, uh, proving their point in a violent, in an aggressive way, and this is something that has to be stopped. But again, mildly stop, because penitentiary system is to blame for a lot of troubles in contemporary societies, not only in Russia. What should be the focus of punishment? Why do you punish the person, and how do you punish the person, and is this punishment proportionate? Because if you take a young teenager and you say, oh, you played an online game where you targeted the White House or whatever, and you sentence this poor kid to many years in prison, or the same goes for drugs, What are you going to achieve with that? Like, really, this is an obvious abuse of power. This is no rule of law. And speaking of rule of law, it's of course important to specify what do we mean and what kind of laws do we have. But insofar as we live in democracies, no single person can set those laws. There has to be some kind of a consensus.
Right. So once again, I want to take you to the past history of Russia, as Russia attacked Ottoman Empire for a number of times, just to reach the hot waters. Just I'm talking about Eastern questions. But do you think that Russia ever tried to attack India to reach Indian Ocean?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Um,
Yes, that's fine. So now I want to change the topic. Educational system of your country. What's the education system, and what kind of human rights are for the awareness of the students and young people, and what kind of syllabus is being offered, what kind of books are being suggested to the students, and what teachers are performing in the schools and college and universities. So what's education system?
um, so, from what I know, there exist certain governmental standards which provide for the content and the structure of educational programs. So let's say for every subject at school, although yes, there are some schools that have certain autonomy, not many of them, but there are some schools like that. I studied in one. But teachers still have the freedom to be flexible and to offer something they think will be beneficial to their students. And of course, we have the constitution. And of course, Russia is part of many international agreements, including those that uphold the values of, childhood and like safe childhood and the right to education. However, many of the things that could be improved cannot really be improved by way of setting standards and by way of stipulating some norms, because they have to be dealt with on the level of society, on the level of individuals. You know, state cannot come into your family, although again this is a very interesting topic for discussion, because one of the points of disagreements between Russia and the West is about the adoption of children and about the cases of taking children out of the families that are deemed unfortunate, that are deemed dangerous for a child to stay in. Mm, I can give you a very simple example. Because from my experience, one cannot generalize. My school was a very special one. But I have one student of English, and she complains to me repeatedly about the attitudes of professors. So there are professors, teachers, yes, who think that they know everything, you know. So this is much about professional ethics. It's like for doctors, the same. When you are going to become a teacher, you have to understand that this is a mission. This is a lifelong, maybe if you don't want to be a full-time teacher, still, in the situation where you teach, you have to be committed to the well-being of your children. And the fact is that teachers are not well paid enough in Russia. And of course, it affects the way they teach, because you have to feel that your profession is valued, that it has some prestige in society. And normally a lot depends on the figure of the head of school and on the teachers that are being selected. And I can say that in in Russia, in Moscow for sure, in Moscow region, we have a number of international schools, especially in the place where I live, because it's like one of the key roads where many houses of some public figures, some government officials are located. You have good schools where you have international teachers. You have like normal canteens, which is a big deal. You know, the food that is being served in schools is also far from being the best. But all in all, this boils down to the state budget, and and also to kleptocracy, yeah, to how money is being distributed and where it goes in the end.
Right. So, what is the family system in your society?
Again,
Family system.
mm, there is this image of Russian babushka. Maybe you know. It's like this character who is overly caring, hyper energetic, who is going to welcome you and make you eat all the food you don't want to eat. But also, some of her cookings are very delicious. And there is this idea of extended family. And in contrast to it stands nuclear family, which consists of mom, dad, maybe one kid. Yeah, so, of course, people, when they decide to have children, they think of their financial prospects too, but not all the people. Yeah, the more educated you are, the more opportunities you have in life, the more you're going to give a thought into. Yeah, so this is called maybe not specifically planned parenting, but you will have them when you're ready for it and you feel like you're prepared. I know that women work a lot in Russia. Like, of course, you can choose to be a homestay mom. There is nothing bad about it, and some women opt for doing that. But because of the communist legacy, sometimes we say that, oh, before revolution, women were supposed to only, like, the primary responsibility of women was to stay home, raise kids, take care of the household. And after the revolution, there was this idea that women should be equal part of society, and this equality is measured by how much they work and how much they contribute to the society in labor, which is nothing new. Again, we celebrate the fact that women in Russia were given voting rights much earlier than they were in some of the Western European states that are now well developed. Yeah, for example, if I remember well, in Switzerland, uh, women were officially granted this right to vote in 1970s, whereas in Russia it happened in 1917. So you can say, yeah. And so when we speak of progress, like, what is progress really? What do we mean by equality? So in Russia, because the state is a secular one, you don't really have a system as such. People are free to do whatever they want to. Of course, in case of some ethnic groups, such as maybe Tatars who live not in the capital city of Tatarstan, but in some provinces, but also in Caucasus, that's for sure, like the place where my dad comes from, they have stricter norms. Like, they won't let you do whatever you want. Although, even here, uh, in Moscow, there are people from everywhere, from Russia, from the globe in general. And I know that Caucasian girls and boys who come to Moscow to study, for many of them, they try alcohol for the first time and engage in some other activities that are not deemed, as allowed as halal, as something they would be allowed to do back home for the first time. And for some of them, even it has negative effects on their studies. So I am for moderation, of course. I think that when you strictly ban people from doing something, oftentimes it triggers the desire in them to engage and to over engage in some things.
Medina, again, I want to know about your textbooks. What is being taught, especially history? What is being taught in your schools and universities, and what kind of stance, intellectual stance they have about your
Mhm.
past history, especially Napoleon Bonaparte, who invaded Russia and Moscow, and he adopted scorched earth policy. So what the students are fed intellectually by the teachers, and what is point of view mentioned in the textbooks about Napoleon Bonaparte and other invaders and the people who attacked Russia.
Mhm. So first of all, I have to mention that I collaborated with one non-governmental organization that is attached to the Moscow State University on a project on the prospects of popularization of science activities, connected with that in Russia. And we took interviews with a number of scientists, scholars, and educationists. And I remember in one interview we were talking about this, freedom of setting up school curriculums, and there was one particular field where everything is much more seriously controlled, much more tightly controlled than elsewhere, and this is about printing textbooks. Why? Because it's a business, because there are people who have hold on these publishing houses, and they make good money from being monopolists on this market of school textbooks. In fact, when I was introducing the Russian educational system to you, or just like, describing what I know about it, I missed one thing, and that is that school plays different roles in different societies. Yeah, comparing, for example, the American system, like, or rather the realities on the ground to what we have in Russia, still in the mind of the Russian policymaker, school is an essential institution every kid has to go through. Yeah, which is a bit discriminatory against refugees. Russia is not particularly welcoming in this respect for now, unfortunately. I hope that is going to change. For whom sometimes it's very hard to get into a Russian school. Um, Yes, but in Russia, it's like, yeah, you have to go there. And so the saying goes that the one who controls the past controls the future. Yeah, so someone who approves of the history narratives has the power over people's minds, which is true. And I can openly say that I have not opened a Russian history textbook in a long time. And I myself was very fortunate because I had amazing professors of history at school, at university. And maybe the best part about it is that I had not only one professor, I had several professors. Different professors taught different periods, and they were true researchers. They were very passionate about their subject. And as I mentioned to you previously, teachers are not very highly paid in Russia, although of course my school it was better, but still, I honor them. And I could have named many names in this interview, like of the people who affected me, who made me who I am right now. So I
I think
think
that
that
you should mention their names just to honor them, because they're good teachers.
yes, so I can mention Pavel Yevdokimov, Alexander Avdeyev, Alexander Kondrashov. Yeah, maybe if we're going to share this, they will be happy to hear their names, but also my university professors, Zoltan Kelemen, Eduard Gabor, some professors of economics who also bear great influence on the way I think. Um, So I'm sure about what is written about Napoleon. I can say for certain that, of course, the Second World War and the Great, as we call it, Patriotic War, is a topic that is much more in the spotlight. Yeah, and the government is much more interested in the way this particular topic is framed, because it's such a big part of today's identity. And as I mentioned, also the ideology of Eurasianism, which is promoted by Alexander Dugin. I'm sure many people know this name or have heard of such a person. It has some connection with the Russian imperialism, but this is an ideology on its own, so you cannot really equate it.
Medina, we have just 10 minutes to go. We have so many topics, aspects of the, the topics and subtopics to talk about. But just I want to know about the Russian and Ukraine war. What's the reason behind it and how it goes on? And what's the reaction by the people?
This is the topic which is very hard to comment on. And many international observers point out that war is not only about Russia-Ukraine relationship, but it's about the international order at large. Yeah, you see people from very rude countries who seem to have no relations with Ukraine or Russia, really, really keeping tabs on the development of this conflict. I think it's a lot about identity, and it's a lot about the future of the Russian state. Because we cannot continue focusing on the West in our foreign policy thinking. And when Ukraine goes West, because Ukraine's such a big deal, it's such a big deal for Russia, for Russian history, and for the Soviet history. It's like a part of Russia is being cut off under a very questionable pretext. It's like Ukraine seems to be refusing and changing Russia for the West. And the question is, what is Ukraine? Like, who is really doing that? Because, educated people, they are less prone to listen to populists. And information, like accurate information, is so hard to obtain that really you cannot say who is who. You can say that there are bad people who do not care about the interests of the people, who make money, who take it without asking for anybody's opinions, who do not fear the backlash of the masses. But I think the true victory can be hailed when the narrative of people to people, like Russian to Ukrainians, Belarusians to Russians, like Russians, Belarusians, when in the news we will finally see the expressions of solidarity between people, just as the human beings, and not as the representatives of the states, because we're people. After all, that's the most important part of our identity.
So what's your take on US-Iran relations?
The US may want to change its relationship with Iran, because the US, although in the recent years it has this attempts to withdraw from everywhere to focus on itself, I believe that this cannot happen. If only because of the richness of the American heritage, especially intellectual heritage, but also because of the historic involvement with many regions of the world. And I think that the US should be the protector of Iran and really not see Israel, but see Iran instead as its primary ally in the Middle East.
So do you think that U.S. Policy towards Iran would be uh, dangerous for Middle East or like this?
Um, the state engage in sponsoring of terrorism and in some black market activities, not because they are inherently bad. Yeah, and also because states are people. Yeah, you cannot say state is some kind of black box agent. Yeah, still there are people who make those policies. And the fact is, when I was doing my research on this relationship, I also understood that what we see in the media cannot tell us the real story, because just like in the US, in Iran too, there are different fractions, there are different institutions, and basically it's an interplay between these institutions. And I know that in the case of Iran, US, there were several instances when the deal was close, like when there were people who were saying, "Oh yes, okay, Iran offers us something, let's go for it." But in the end, those people who had this hawkish, hard realist mentality, they won, because again, this is part of human perception. We want to focus on the bad things to prevent them. Yeah, if there is someone who says, "Oh, this is dangerous," we tend to listen to this person because we want to avoid getting in danger. And of course, Iran, maybe we can say that this state is not centralized enough. And really, on different parts in different regions of the country, there are some elements which act autonomously from the state, and maybe which the state would like to control. But I believe that things are going to get better, because as the United States understand that their influence can wane, can fade away, I hope that maybe if not this administration, then the next administration will rethink its Middle Eastern policy, but also the uh, India, China, Pakistan. This Kashmir issue is going to gain ever greater prominence.
So you have talked a lot about terrorism, and you have worked on psychology of terrorism. So, what actually you mean when you use this term terrorism?
Yes. Um, what are the first things that come to mind when we speak of terrorism today? Of course, first of all, we think of the 9/11 attack. Then we might think of the Israel-Palestinian relationship. But in the context of Russia, we also have a couple of well-known events. So we have the siege of the Nordost, yeah, when the cinema was occupied, was basically held by the terrorists, and the people within it were. And also Beslan, and of course the Chechen wars, like the two Chechen wars. And the question is, why did the Yeltsin administration decide not to have any negotiations? Why did they decide to fight for Chechnya, staying inside of Russia? And I think that it's actually pretty hard to give some justifiable reasons for that bloodshed. And I think that the sentiments of those people who wanted to break free from Russia had to be acknowledged. Because indeed, these people were dissatisfied with the situation inside of Russia, and they had a good reason to be. Because historically, again, Imperial Russia committed quite many atrocities in the region.
Medina, this is time is going to uh, is not giving us more time to talk about. We had a number of other topics we could talk about Afghanistan, about Pakistan, India, and other relations. and this was very productive and very creative discussion, and very boldly you tackled all the questions. So I'm really thankful to you that you spare time for our GsTv UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.